Hi, well, it's really great to be here. And, all the speakers, especially Khan, that last talk was so wonderful. Just really, I don't know about all of you, just feel really emotional about the power of creativity. And we've talked a lot about kind of the industry and the big picture view, and I want to focus on the magic that happens within a creative team. So to get us all into the mood, I want you to close your eyes. Promise not to fall asleep. We're going to do a little bit of an exercise. So I want you to close your eyes and think about your favorite project in terms of the process. Maybe the outcome was great too, but I want us to focus on the process. Maybe it's your current project, maybe it happened a long time ago, but put yourself back in that place. What was your role on the team? Why was it so great? Who were you working with? And what are 3 ingredients that made that process stand out in your mind, that made it so special? So if you want, feel free to write those 3 ingredients down. We'll come back to them later, or type it in your phone, or just remember it. Oftentimes, organizations will be intentional about the environment they expect creativity to happen in. You can usually tell where the creatives sit in the company, or how much the company values creativity by the way that it's designed. But what's less thought about and less designed for is the actual process for how teams work. What are the practices and conditions that team works in? And I think there's a real opportunity to innovate here. We're talking about the future, and yes, it's good to have the big picture of the industry, but I want us to go deep into how teams work, because I think there's potential to really redesign it. There's a chance to innovate, and a little bit of design in this space can have a huge impact. And the reason it matters is because there's a lot at stake. I would say everything. The quality of the output, when you have a highly engaged team, the work is better. The mental and emotional health, we'll get into that later, and you just got a good dose of that with Khan. The morale of the team and the culture of the organization. The ability to attract and retain talent. The brand image. The bottom line. Everything. Most recently, I was working with Dropbox on their design research team. And we were doing research to understand the people's relationship to work. And what does it mean to work in an enlightened way? And what was interesting is that most people that we talked to people in all different industries, all over the world, all different ages. Most people had a burnout story, and their burnout story happened between the age of 26 and 31. Now, advertising, at least in the United States, has a reputation for high burnout. And, it's an enticing career for a young creative person. You get paid to come up with lots of ideas, and you see your ideas out in the world, and you can have an impact. If you stay in the industry long enough, you get paid really well. But I think the process is designed for short-term gain at the expense of a bigger long-term reward. I have my own burnout story at the age of 31. I was about 5 years into my career. I was in advertising. And it started out okay, but I had found myself in a kind of unhealthy environment. I was feeling used and abused as a junior creative person. And, but I actually relished the pain. It was almost like a badge of pride. Oh, this is a sign that I've made it. This is what it feels like, success and walking down Madison Avenue. And then my body revolted. And I woke up to a bald spot that appeared overnight due to stress. I also suffered from chronic hives and restless leg syndrome. I had never experienced anything like this before, had a very healthy immune system, and I remember saying back then, God, if I stay in this situation, I feel like my body is going to grow cancer. So that was my wake-up call, and I resigned and got myself out of that situation. And what was interesting is that I blossomed creatively as soon as I got out of this unhealthy, toxic environment. I don't know why we expect creative greatness to come from subpar conditions. You wouldn't expect an athlete to perform at the top of her game if she's compromised emotionally or mentally. Actually, quite the contrary. Athletes are in the center of a well-designed ecosystem. They have a regiment tailored to them based on their skills and their goals. They have a support team with a coach and nutritionists and trainers. They have access to the best tools and equipment. The sports industry knows the correlation between your emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And to expect greatness in one area, you need to address and design for all three of those areas of people's wellness. So I want to introduce a new role to the creative industry. And it's the creative coach. And the creative coach's job is to facilitate the conditions and practices for the best work and the best people to happen. They are not mutually exclusive. This was coined by Chris Waldenkrantz from Berg School, who came out to visit me as I was running a creative and talent incubator in LA. He was curious and wanted to come by and observe for a few days and see what we were all about. So observation doesn't really happen in this program. We quickly put him to work, and he became a guest mentor and kind of got his hands dirty and just became part of the team for his time with us. And then he went back to Berg School and wrote an article about his experience and coined the term creative coach to describe the way I was working with the team. I had never thought of it really before that. So before I go further, I want to give you a little bit of context. I'm a bit of what Pip described, kind of being a little bit all over the place, so to speak, or dancing around in different industries. I consider myself a conceptual artist, and people are my medium, and process is my art form. I like to design frameworks and invite people to participate, and their participation becomes the art. I'll give an example, because usually when I say that at cocktail parties, people are like, I have more questions. One of my projects was making a friend a day for a year, and I documented it as a social experiment. So I went out in the world every single day, connected with people deeply. Once we felt a level of trust, formally asked them to be my date, my friend for that day, took their picture and wrote a story about the encounter. And at the end of the year, I brought them all together to meet each other and read about the stories. And it was a huge gallery space, and it was empty except for the people and the posters for every day of the year, because the art was really the connections and the stories and the relationships. Another example of people as a medium and process as an art form was a series I did on data portraits, where I would track groups of people's movements over the course of a day in a specific location, and had custom software that allowed me to art direct their GPS data. And these are all motion graphics. These are moments in time that you can see, and that creates a distinct footprint. So as they're moving, they're essentially a brushstroke on the collective canvas. I was in commercial art. That's where I started my career, so really understood the power of creativity in business. And then ran a postgraduate portfolio program, so was on the front lines helping hundreds of creative people get their dream job in the industry. And that's where I really discovered a love for professional development and coaching. I was asked to design and run a talent incubator that was within 72andSunny, called 72U. And that is really where a lot of my point of view comes from. That was working with teams and really innovating and experimenting with new ways of working within a multidisciplinary team. And I was a creative resident at IDEO, and so really immersed in the design thinking, design process, and trusting in a well-designed process can be applied to any business problem. And lastly, doing some design research with Dropbox, understanding people's relationship to work. So that kind of all informs my point of view and what I'm going to share with you today. But I want to go back to 72U, which was the creative incubator, because that's really where, for what we're talking about today, where I got my hands dirty working with the team and iterating. So to give you kind of an overview, it is a 3-month program. It attracts people from all over the world, multidisciplinary, generally filmmakers and writers and designers and creative technologists. But then we would attract data scientists and poets and puppeteers and musicians. I affectionately refer to them as wonderful weirdos. I loved collecting them and would build a team of 7 to 8 people and then take them on this creative journey. And you know, they gave up a lot. They didn't really know what they were signing up for. They didn't know who else they were going to be working with or what they were going to be working on. So a real commitment to, I guess, trust, and then a real commitment to their own personal and professional development. But one of the things that really drew them together, or to this program, was the chance to collaborate with other creative people. I think there's just, from what I experienced, a real desire to work with people that had different skill sets than they did, and to be inspired by other people's points of views. And it was a lot of learning by making. So to give you a little bit of an example of the types of work that we were able to do in this program, there was short documentary films, pop-up gallery show, interactive sculptures. We designed and built a park. We did immersive events, murals, data visualization, product design, interactive music videos. So you can imagine this huge gamut. I am an expert in none of these areas. But my job as the creative coach was to find the right people, bring them together, inspire them, and take them on this journey. And I was running this program for about 4 years, and about 3 years in, I'm like, wow, what if I run out of ideas for projects? You know, it started getting, or I thought in my head, this could get hard to keep topping. But I never ran out of inspiration because my formula was I never committed to any projects until I knew who was in the program. And I, based on their interests and skill sets and what's happening in culture and then opportunities that presented themselves, there was constantly new stimulation to be inspired. So to give a couple examples of kind of going into some of the creative projects, so we often had guest speakers come in from inside the company and outside the company. And I thought it was really important that we give the guest speakers a gift. And the brief for the team was, you have to make the gift so good that people want to come speak just to get the gift. And so one of them, this was inspired by a Russian data scientist who was in the group. We basically had all of the guest speakers fill out a questionnaire on their risk profile. What types of risks do they take? And you can see it in the key. The spiky behavior represents risky behavior, and where the spikes are represent what type of risks they take. So then we made a poster, and so that they could see what their risk profile, how it compared with other people. It was all private, so they only knew who theirs was, which one theirs was. And then we thought, wouldn't it be cool if we 3D printed this in porcelain? So everyone, all the guest speakers for that cohort got a poster and a porcelain sculpture of their risk profile. Another example of kind of the creativity that came out of this program, this was inspired by a product designer and a creative technologist in the group. I will say the program was all about radical collaboration. And so everyone had their hand on every project, but we were generally doing 2 to 3 projects at a time. So people were majoring and minoring in different projects. And it was just kind of this beautiful dance, and a very fluid flow of projects and kind of people passing them on and touching them at different phases. So this one is based on, it's a device that measures the environment and lets you know if you're in the optimal conditions for creativity. It's based on research into sensory stimuli. There is an ideal range for light range, temperature range, and sound level for creativity, to foster creativity. And so this scans the environment every minute and lights up accordingly. Another project was, sometimes I would give them a brief, and I had no idea how they were going to solve it. And it was pretty magical to be in this incubator because it was a safe place to experiment. We didn't do client work. So we got to really focus on the process and really encourage and nurture creativity in a very pure sense. So this is what they came back with. And it's always interesting, too, to kind of throw out to the group and see what they come back to. It's always much more interesting than what I would have come up with. This is an interactive poster. The art is the interface. And I think the back is just as beautiful as the front, which is why I show it as well. But it composes original music. And then lastly, as an example, one of the documentaries we did was on automation and how it will affect our sense of purpose. All of these projects, by the way, have a video. You can, if you're curious, you can go to my website and watch the videos and see some of the other projects. But for this one, for the documentary film, we thought, wouldn't it be cool if for a film on automation, what if we live compose the score with some humans and an AI? And that's what we did. And the AI did create some really interesting music that the humans alone would not have come up with. They did say it was kind of like playing with a drunk human. So we're safe for a little while, I think for at least 5 years, but AI can be programmed to come up with creative solutions. Not to scare you all. So from my time, each one of these, I ended up building and leading 11 unique creative teams. And they came from all over the world. And we only had 3 months together, so we very quickly had to get each on the same page. We all wanted to get as much done as we could in this 3 months. And I found through constantly dialing in my formula that these were the conditions that elicited the high-performing creative teams. So psychological safety is first and foremost, you have to have it. Google did a big study a couple years ago. They wanted to understand why some teams outperformed other teams. And what they found was that it had nothing to do with IQ. It had nothing to do with whether the team was friendly and got beers after work. It came down to psychological safety. And that is even more true when you are in the creative space or the innovative space. Because creativity, and the way I define creativity is coming up with novel ideas that work. And if you need to come up with novel ideas that work, that means in the process, you are going to throw out a lot of ideas, and some are not going to be good. And if you don't feel safe to share ideas, you are going to shut off the potential. Another is the experimentation and play, and other people call this curiosity. Play is great because it doesn't have an agenda, right? You have freedom to be curious, and you're not on the hook for it. I loved using the word experiment as a way to manage expectations. We're experimenting. all of a sudden people feel safer. Like, oh, phew, we don't have to like, produce something necessarily. We can play. And what's kind of counterintuitive was actually that mindset helped produce better results, just freeing their mind and encouraging play. Emotional intelligence is another really big one. I know we heard from other speakers that creativity is like one of the most important skill sets of the future. I totally agree. I would also add EQ, hugely important. I actually think, my theory is that as things get more automated, the human type of skills like creativity and EQ are just going to become more valuable. We know that about creativity, but I think emotional intelligence, empathy. There were times when I would be so enamored with someone's skill set that I would kind of overlook their low EQ and hope it didn't kind of rear its ugly head. And it really caused a lot of problems within a team. If you've got 6 or 7 people in a team, the team dynamic is the 8th person. And it just takes one person, I'm sure you've all experienced that one person in a team that can really wreak havoc within the group. So I not only started screening for EQ and making that a major criteria, but also started developing our EQ as we were in the program. Learning by doing, this is really thinking with your hands and iterating. There's only so much you can there's only so much you can do theorizing. Diversity, we've talked a lot about diversity, and I would just build off of the other speakers. I think this industry needs to start thinking about diversity in terms of age. There's a lot we can learn, and I think there's starting to be a movement in the United States with this like mentor-internship relationship. I think the people in the beginning of their careers and the people at the end of their careers can learn a lot from each other. And I think there's a lot of beautiful things. I hope to see more kind of like intergenerational programming. And then lastly, perceived low stakes. And we talked about this a little bit. There were times where I saw in the team, and even though we weren't working on client work, the stakes were high for them. They were maybe wanting to get a job at 72 and Sunny, which was, I don't know if I mentioned 72U, the talent incubator is inside 72 and Sunny. Or, they had given up a lot. They had a lot riding on this. They didn't want to squash this opportunity, whatever it happened to be. And when I sensed that, their aperture closed. It started to narrow, right? When you are in a fight or flight mode, which is when you are feeling stressed, you tend to narrow the aperture, and that is the opposite of coming up with new and divergent ideas. So when I saw this in the group, I would do what I could to lower the perceived stakes. I would try to just bring it down. And when I did that, I saw the floodgates open again with creativity. So if you find yourself getting stuck, you've got a deadline, figure out how you can bring the stakes down. You can kind of gamify that a little bit. So I want to talk about, so these are some of the conditions, but I want to talk about some of my favorite practices. And these are not prescriptive. These worked in this context. So I hope that some of these will be familiar, you'll get inspired, maybe you might want to adopt some or be inspired to come up with your own. So as I mentioned before, we had the team come together very quickly. We had a lot to do. My job as the creative coach was to take them on this journey and maintain the optimal conditions for their personal and professional development. And so the way I did that they came from all over the world, all different ages, ethnicities, levels of experience, points in their careers, a wide range. And so we quickly needed to get on the same page and be one unit. And so what I did the first day was I would have them, to set the tone, come in with answering the question, what are 3 turning points in your life? And that is such a better way to get to the heart of who someone is than what did you study or where did you go to school or what are you passionate about is a good question too. And it was so fascinating, the responses. Oftentimes, and this would be in the first first couple hours of us all meeting each other for the first time. And I would also share and pour my heart out, because I think as a leader in the team, I had to be just as vulnerable as they were. I wouldn't ask them to do anything I wasn't willing to do myself. And so we shared 3 turning points, and oftentimes there would be tears. People would really open up and be emotional and share their heart out, and quickly it would bond the group. It was also interesting, too, what people didn't share. You could tell when people were really closed off or had trust issues, because they would not reveal much about themselves. A daily ritual, and we worked in a very, I would say this was a very, I would describe it as a radical collaboration. We all worked in the same studio. No one had their own desk. As I mentioned, we were working on multiple projects at any given time, so you walked in, no day was the same, but I did think it was important that we all had, that we started off the day at least with one thing that was consistent. So we would do meditation for 10 minutes, and then we would spend 20 minutes, someone would put together a presentation of inspiration. So the first 30 minutes of every day was meditation and inspiration. And also it was like them practicing their leadership skills and sharing a bit about themselves and what inspires them with the rest of the group. So I want to show a video. It's just one video. I couldn't help myself. One of the first projects I have them do as well is announce to the organization that they've arrived. I'm so passionate about making and collaboration, because I think making is so fundamentally human, and when you make with another human, it is the ultimate bonding experience. I also wanted to give them a quick win, so I would give them this assignment on the first day, and they generally had 2 or 3 days to kind of turn it around and execute. So this assignment was announce yourself to the company and be playful, and this was my favorite response, but each of the cohorts would do it.
We are bound to prank the mother office. We got 2 minds. 2 minds. We're talking box, wall, beret, belay. I'm belay.
So, it's nice to just throw a little chaos, back to the chaos, into an organization and let people have fun with that. So another thing, I kind of alluded to this earlier, thing that I did as a creative coach was I would fit the project to the people. And I think oftentimes, and I know that there's business constraints, we fit the people to the project. But that's not utilizing the resources you have, and you don't get the engagement isn't as deep, right? When you're tapping into someone's innate passion and skill sets, you're gonna get so much more out of them. So this was an example. This is Tim. He's an architecture student who graduated from architecture school and had never built anything. And Perry was an engineer, and so their skill sets, there was 5 other people on the team. Their skill sets inspired us to design and build a park. We also had an opportunity, a piece of land became available, it was donated to us. It was a derelict piece of land, and we were invited to turn it into a community-driven park for nonprofit events. So a very inspiring, kind of call to action, and we had the skill sets. I did hire a contractor because 4 of the 7 people in the team had never used power tools before, and I really don't like to outsource. So I got extra insurance and a good contractor. We all walked away with our fingers, And what was interesting about this project was, and I don't know if I'd mentioned this earlier, I never told them what to make. I would define the constraints and then see what they came up with. But one of the constraints for this project was it was technically private property. So it needed to be locked up at night. It needed to have a fence, but we wanted it to be open to the public. So what the team came up with was the Finesque. And it's a fence that turns into a desk. So at night, you can lock it up, and then during the day, you know when it's open because the fence turns into a table. And also part of the design, this isn't a great picture, but it's a very modifiable space to allow for lots of different types of activities to take place. Another thing that I did, this was actually the biggest innovation as far as team dynamics and getting the most out of a high-performing creative team, was introducing team coaching. As on the leadership level, I had coaching, and that was great, but honestly, it felt a lot like work therapy. And then I got the idea, or I had a friend that is a team coach, and I invited her in to work with the team. And that revolutionized the way we worked. As you can see, for example, so she came in and we developed a team charter, which is like, here's how we want to work. We all bought in, we all designed this together, and now we're all accountable for it. And then every couple weeks, we would get together on Fridays, have a beer, and pull out the scorecards. And we would, in small groups, talk about how we did on each of those attributes. And it was interesting because before we would do this, we'd grab a beer and we'd like talk about the highs and lows of the week, and and that was great. It was nice to celebrate the little wins that happened during the week that we would have forgotten about because things were so busy. But it didn't really pull up the elephant in the room. It didn't really, just asking people, hey, okay, so what were some lows, didn't get to the heart of some of the issues that were going on. But this did, because now we had attributes, and now we had to say, so what was our psychological safety? And we had to come up with an example of it being good or bad. And so as you can imagine, the red is not good, some problems. Green is great. Yellow, there's some stuff to figure out. And you can see how each week we got better. We were able to quantify our emotion, our EQ as a team. And then, so I talked about radical collaboration. I rarely pulled the creative director card and said, we're going with that one. What I did do is I facilitated the team to come up with a decision. Because having them deeply invested makes for the best work. And if they have the agency and they have made that decision, they are going to be accountable for it and put their all into it. So what that looked like in a brainstorm, because you can see collaboration gone wrong, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. It's like gridlock, it's exhausting, nothing gets done. We would come up, everyone needs to come up with 10 ideas or 20 ideas, whatever it is, put it on the wall on this date. I would reread the brief to get everyone's head back in the game. What are we trying to do here? What are our constraints? And then we'd do voting dots, or everyone needs to pick 3 or 5 of their best ideas. And we would cull down the ideas. And then finally, really through like a discussion, we would get to the final decision. And the golden rule of collaboration there's deciders and there's influencers. And the decider has to hear everyone out before making a decision. And the influencers need to get on board once they've been heard. And the thing is, throughout the stage of a project, the decider and influencers change. So as an example, making a film. When you're shooting, maybe the director is the decider and the others are the influencer. And then when you're in post-production, maybe it's the editor that's the decider and the others are the influencers. So it was this very dynamic space, but it does require some facilitation. As I mentioned before, I've worked at a lot of, I've been fortunate to work at some really great organizations and want to share a couple of my favorite practices. So this is a Work With Me doc. And This is great for when you're starting out on a project, you're working with new people, or just for your organization. Maybe have everyone fill one of these out. It's a manual for how to work with you. What's your communication style? How do you like to receive feedback? What are your career goals? How can this project help you? And how can I help you get where you're going? Obviously, this is modifiable, and then there's some more personal stuff at the bottom. But when you walk into a project and you have a work with me doc for everyone on the team, you are light years ahead as far as building trust and knowing how you can support each other. Another thing, this is a recent discovery from Dropbox, is the Enneagram. I don't know if you've heard of it. It looks like a cult religion, but the Enneagram it's a personality test. And I've taken other personality tests, and it's fun to get the results, but I then don't know how to apply it. That's not very practical. The Enneagram is different, I've found. So you take the personality test, and there's like 9 different worldviews. And there's lots of books and experts, but that's the book that I use. And oftentimes, before a meeting, Dropbox really supports this. So everyone in the company is encouraged to take the test and put it in their profile. So I can look someone up, see what their number is, and before I have a meeting, I read up on them, and I'm able to frame a conversation in terms that is going to connect with them. And it's so fascinating to look at this test, and when you take it, it's like looking in the mirror. It's so validating, and also like you feel incredibly, naked or something. But it's fascinating. So I encourage you to look into the Enneagram. And then, at IDEO, they have lots of great practices, but one of them is, kind of supporting camaraderie. And this has started, going back to kind of the creative coach, it can be a role, that's great, but probably oftentimes, maybe it can't be a dedicated role. It's really a mindset. And an example of that is the IT guy, Ian, at IDEO, at 4:30, he would bring out some really good scotch, and 4:30 is on Friday, and the IT desk is to the left there, so you can see that it's open and it's in the center, very visible, and people would congregate. And what was so great about it is that you would end up talking to people in different parts of the company that you never would have talked to otherwise. And it was started by the IT guy. It's not like none of these practices need to come from leadership. This is one that I love. This was 72 and Sunny hand-painted or hand-signed holiday cards. I thought for sure after the company reached over 700 people that they were going to have to do away with this practice. From my knowledge, I'm not there anymore, I think they still do it, but every single person in the company would get a handwritten card, and from all the partners. You would think, if I were them, I would have been like, let's divide it up, and you take some, but they would all write personalized notes and talk about feeling seen and heard, which is a really important aspect of, creating the conditions for the best work to happen. This is a project alignment doc, and so this is similar. When you're going into a project, what are your expectations for this project? Personally and professionally, let's get on the same page about it. And I find this to be really, really helpful as far as kind of communicating how you can support each other, and discovery too. Like, are we thinking about this project the same way? This last one is from IDEO, and this is in one of the bathrooms. They would have a monthly question, and it was great because you'd go into the bathroom and it really felt a sense of the community. You could get so easily caught up in your own little work bubble, as I'm sure we've all experienced. You're kind of just working closely with a small group of people. But this type of practice gives you a sense of the larger community, and also gives you pause and has you reflect. So what I have found is that learning fuels creativity, and I would say creativity fuels learning. I think that personal and professional development should be part of the day-to-day creative process. And my hope for the industry is that we redesign the process, that we train creative directors to be more like creative coaches, and that we think about the process in terms of designing more humane, making it more humane and sustainable. So let's reflect for a minute. In the beginning, when we first came together, we did the exercise, thinking back to those 3 ingredients that you wrote down or maybe have in your head. Why don't you have that now? And more importantly, how can you design in your current projects with the current people you're working with? What are some practices you can design and introduce to your team that bring back those fundamental ingredients that make you come alive creatively? And I'll just leave you at that. Thank you.